into what does Vanity Ultra mean? How did you guys come up with that name, and what does that name mean to you?
Wow. So it's actually crazy. So the name, just Vanity alone, it was my junior high school, my childhood friend who I actually grew up with in California. Because after I was born in Glendale, my parents, we moved to San Diego. And he was actually my next door neighbor.
Wow.
And so I moved to Virginia first, and then he shortly followed suit.
Okay.
And he had like a brand at the time in like his junior high school, my sophomore year, it was called like Vanity.
Well, today we have a different pace to our episode from within, man. As you see, we're in a beautiful, what is this? E30. Shout out to Bradley for letting us use this. And today we have my guy Kenneth Kirk in here, man. So first of all, I want to talk about where are you from? Like, what is your beginnings?
Yeah, so I was born in Glendale, California.
Okay.
And then I moved out here around first kindergarten, actually, because my dad was in the Navy.
Gotcha.
So yeah, it's pretty much came out here. Actually, funny story, because I was just talking about it at a shoot earlier I had. I grew up like such like a bigger kid. So like I was always playing sports. I love basketball. Like that was actually for me like my first passion.
Wow.
Because I always told my mom like I'm gonna make it to the NBA someday. Obviously that of course didn't happen. But you know, growing up, like even with me having a love of sports, I've always had love for other things such as like music, fashion, and I really didn't get to the interest of me what I'm doing now till like later. I want to say towards like my senior year of high school.
Yeah,
so
gotcha. Yeah, I was just gonna ask like, what were some of your biggest influences? You know, especially like you say, coming from California, you didn't spend a lot of time here, but in this area, such a melting pot of different cultures, different music. Of course, Pharrell and whatnot, Push, Missy. Who were some of your biggest influences,
man,
coming up?
I would say for me, really like Pharrell, of course, just like being from here. Kanye for sure.
Yeah.
Honestly, just getting inspired by watching like music videos and stuff like that. Like, before going to school, like in my living room watching MTV Jams or something, like watching a video or something, watching like fashion related towards like what Pharrell may be showing, like his cars or his jewelry or things like that, and like really be inspired by just that. But I think just overall day to day, like that's truly what I got inspired by. Just like going to school, seeing people's outfits, like coming home, like watching music videos, watching 106 in Park.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just honestly, just being around a great, like just culture shock of everything, just being here.
Right.
So,
yeah. And like you said, you mentioned your fashion. Obviously, if you've ever seen them on Instagram or anywhere, you always got it on. Today, I try to come a little correct. I try to keep up.
I'm chilling, man. I'm chilling.
But talk to me about some of your biggest fashion influences. Back then and now, like how were you able to curate your style, and also just be so versatile because like I said, you look at your social media, you're in a whole bunch of different garments, day-to-day things. Your style can vary each day. So how did you curate your style? What was that process like? And how do you even shop and find all these brands? Because I'm still trying to figure that out myself.
Man, that's a great question, honestly.
Yeah.
So for me, like growing up, I mean, obviously, like I mentioned, I was a bigger kid. Like the most I ever weighed was probably like 275.
Wow.
So I was a big kid. So like, and for me, I was kind of shy. So like, I didn't necessarily have the confidence to wear certain things, but I always loved fashion in a sense, especially with basketball, kind of like that transcending. But once I really got into fashion and got into kind of like what I'm doing is now, for me, it's just a lot of studying, honestly.
Yeah.
Just studying a lot of brands. People say like YouTube University. I was watching a lot of like fashion YouTubers as far as the brands they like to wear. And really just doing my research, honestly, and kind of just going about incorporating my own style of just people who I felt like just inspired by. So for me, honestly, I think when it comes to now, like my fashion in terms of like my style, I would say like I just try to find what's comfortable to me, but then also try to go out of bounds a little bit, try to go like off the cuff of like trying different styles, trying different, garments per se, but still make it to where it is me.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because I think at the end of the day, when it comes to your style, like it has a somewhat fit to what you are as a person.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. Going to your shoots, all your shoots they're very tailored to you. None of them are, out of the ordinary. Like all of them have a certain feel, a certain aesthetic, a certain warmth, to your photos and
Certainly.
whatnot. So, uh, how did you, curate that? How did you like create that specific look that you do, with all of your shoes? Because I feel like it's a common theme, with most of your stuff.
Yeah, so like for me, like the biggest thing for me, especially when it came to my own self-produced projects, is kind of like going about starting from the basis of what I'm wearing and then everything surrounding that, put everything together that way.
Mhm.
So it's like, wearing a particular garment, I know that for me, I'll be better off, using like a studio space for it, just
Right.
because it's be a little bit more of an editorial look, especially when it comes to building out a personal portfolio for myself.
Right.
Or even when it's brand related shoots where brands are sending me something and they're wanting me to take control. It's like knowing what I'm being sent, I can already have an idea of like, okay, this is the location it needs to be at. Like, this is the song that needs to be used for the video or like the
Yeah.
B-roll or something, just because I do a lot of research in terms of what other brands are doing in terms of like their shoots, their editorials and things of that nature. So I try to like have that in my mindset in terms of
Mhm.
when, you know, presenting a portfolio. Cause I think that's the biggest thing. Like, and I've told like a lot of my homies this, like when it comes to, I feel like with now, like, even though like, of course, whatever you put out, like just know that in terms of like where it be social media or just rather like people are always watching.
All right.
So
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing for me is always wanting to put
Excuse
out
me.
something that's of quality. So that way when that person that I potentially and hopefully like thankfully want to work with,
Right.
they see the work and they'll say, okay, like he put his time into, whether it be his shoots or whether it be like the podcast that, oh, not the podcast, but like, well, yeah, the podcast
Yeah.
too, but like, the playlists I curate, like, because for me, like, even with that, like, I have a huge love of like music.
Mm.
And eventually I want to DJ at some point, and that's actually something I'm working on now.
Gotcha.
So,
Okay. Okay.
um, yeah, man. So I want to be able to just do as much as I can because I think that my mom's always told me this. Like when it comes to creativity, I do feel like that's my gift, and so with that gift, I want to be able to utilize it as much as possible.
Right. Going, switching to a little personal. Uh, I've seen you around here running a couple times.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Not as many miles, not nearly as many miles
Yeah,
as
yeah.
you. What, you know, how did you develop that passion for running, and how do you even stay motivated to? Because you run like 10, 11, 15 different.
Man,
I can't do it. But how do you get yourself up? How did you even get into that type of lifestyle?
man. So like for me, like obviously, like I mentioned earlier in the interview, like with me playing basketball, like
Yeah.
that was something I did every day. Like having my mom drop me off at the rec center, like playing for hours and hours. And then once I got out of high school, once I got into more so college and things of that nature, I was like, what was a way that I can still keep myself active? Obviously, go to the gym, of course, but
Right.
like, what's another thing? And so that's when necessarily I got into running.
Mhm.
And actually, like earlier this year, I ran my very first race,
Okay.
which was a marathon, which a lot of people were like, "What? Like that's so crazy." But for me, it was something like I knew, like for me, the training over the years, I wanted to start off with something that I knew was going to be the hardest.
Mhm.
So that by far, the marathon, I tell everyone, like that was the hardest thing
Yeah.
I've ever done. Like just to have like the mental, like just to endure within that race and everything. But now, like even now, like for instance, like for me, even times of a day of a shoot, I usually go running that early that morning at like 5 a.m. just to like kind of knock out
Yeah.
any sort of nerves I may have, which for me now I rarely get nervous, but I would say like even still now, like I have a routine of like if I gotta shoot that day, like all right, like it's a week of prep, like for
Yeah.
me in all facets. Cause I
Mhm.
think if I sleep well, if I prepare well in terms of like direction side of things and just like even with running, like I make sure to just stay on point leading up to that day and even on that morning. So yeah,
Yeah, that's great, man. You definitely are an inspiration.
man, thank you.
I was trying to get back into it this summer. And yeah, it helped. It helps, like just the mental aspect, the mental hurdles of like, let me just get these miles out the way. Just get out the way, and at the end of the day, it's gonna be a benefit. So I
1000%.
love that, man. Switching to Vanity Ultra.
Mm,
I've been tapping in for a while now.
thank you.
You have a partner. I can't think of his name right now.
My homie Elijah.
Yeah,
Elijah, if you're watching
yeah,
this,
yeah. Shout out to Elijah.
shout out to Elijah Evans.
Got you. And how did that that podcast come about? And also, what is the process of your process of getting guests, getting the right guests that fit your show, and
Man,
also developing these talking points to have a real conversation with all these different people from all different walks of life. So
For me, honestly, like how I got started, actually, I was in college working at a retail store. If anybody in Virginia knows Dillard's,
Yeah.
working there during college, just trying to make money at the same time, like studying and everything. Um, and literally, we were working at the same time, and we were just coming back from COVID because
Hmm.
we were just coming back from that. And I was telling Elijah of like how like I've been listening to a lot of podcasts during like during quarantine and everything, and I
Hmm.
was like, yo, like I think it'd be cool like if I started my own. He was like, yo, I was thinking the same thing. And so we were just like, we both had the same interests. We both had the same tastes as far as like music and all other sort of things. So I was like, let's do it.
All right.
Our very first recording, I kid you not, was literally in the backyard of my parents' crib. And literally the audio was terrible. Like
Yeah, not
the
true.
birds were
Yeah.
chirping, like you could hear the wind chimes, like. And then that night, I was like, yeah, I gotta find somewhere to record. And so thankfully, we was able to record at like Slover Library in downtown Norfolk. Found the studio; it was completely free.
Yeah.
And so we were using that at the time. And in terms of the guests, like for me, all the guests we've had on are just people who I truly like admire, like creatively.
Yes. Yes.
Just from any, like you said, like any sort of walks of life. And I feel like with the guest curation, like I try to go about it in a way where, I go about it with my own personal taste. So like you probably have noticed already with the show, it's like I've had, brand owners, I've had professional athletes,
Yes.
I've had a chef, even like music artists, because all these things, relate to my interests and relate to what I truly enjoy. And so I want to be able to have people on that I admire that necessarily fit that.
Exactly.
And it's even crazy just thinking about it, even with the question, like there was one particular guest we had by the name of Danny Lomas, and he was on this show way back when I was in college, like 2016, 2017, called PAQ, and they were based in London. And I just remember like after class, literally watching that show, like from a late night class, coming home, watching that show, watching the episode, and then to be on a video call with him doing an interview and him saying like, I love the way you guys curate your show, like love the interview.
Yeah.
Like it just was unreal to me. But
Yeah.
I feel like that's just a testament to what you do and what you work,
Exactly.
what you work on. So yeah.
Yeah, like you've definitely, like I said, inspired me in that sense of just making sure everything is clean, everything has it's consistent. We try to do the same thing with our show. Just having different people that we are, genuinely interested in.
Right.
Just not trying to go for big names because, that doesn't do anything for us. So just having like, real genuine conversations like this.
Yeah.
And just
Which I love this, by the way. This
yeah,
is insane.
yeah. I was this is super crazy. Shout out, this is all Kyrie. But yeah, man. I also, one episode that really stuck out to me, that it was one of my favorites, is the with Sydney McLaughlin. Not Sydney McLaughlin.
Nicole.
Nicole McLaughlin. Yes.
Oh, man,
And she does amazing work. I've been a fan of hers for years.
So I got a story behiund that. So.
Yeah. Oh, please do tell after this question. But
of course.
with her having such a big following, and you don't go for people just with 200,000 followers,
right.
or it varies. So how is it like just to first of all get in contact with these people who are usually less accessible than the normal person? So how was that process going through to get these the bigger names on the show?
Man, it's a process, man. Like for me, like there's been weeks like over the past few years where I've sent out maybe like 20 emails in a week, just like reaching out to people who I mentioned, like just I'm admired by. And like with Nicole, like that was a process. Like I remember I reached out to her manager in March of 2022, said, oh, we would love to do it, but we just got to find some time coming up. And the interview didn't happen until March 2023.
Wow.
A week before my birthday, before I went to New York for my birthday.
Wow.
And
that's crazy.
The thing with that, it's like, and I feel like a lot of people can relate to what I'm saying when I say this. It's like, just because, like, for instance, like I sent email out, at least she responded back. I could have been a person maybe 3 months down the line, been like, nah, this is not going to happen. Let me just not even bother. But I continue just to have that constant communication every other few months of like, hey, what would be the best available dates? Like, just having that's cordial, just like coordination of just things and just communication. Yeah. So like once that opportunity did arrive, it was unbelievable, honestly.
Yeah. That's definitely one of my favorite episodes. Like she's such a fun person. Of course, all of her designs are just I don't even know how she thinks about that stuff, but that was definitely one of my favorite episodes. And what does Vanity Ultra mean? How did you guys come up with that name, and what does that name mean to you?
Wow. So it's actually crazy. So the name, just Vanity alone, it was my junior high school, my childhood friend who I actually grew up with in California. Because after I was born in Glendale, my parents, we moved to San Diego, and he was actually my next door neighbor.
Wow.
And so I moved to Virginia first, and then he shortly followed suit.
Okay.
And he had like a brand at the time in like his junior high school, my sophomore year, it was called like Vanity. And right before he graduated, he was like, "Yo, like I don't have any plans to like use the name anymore, so like you can use it." So I was like, "Oh snap, okay." But I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do at the time with it. And then once the podcast opportunity came about, that's when I was like, "Okay, we do that,
cool,
Vanity." But then I was like, "I need something else." So like at the time, I was during quarantine was listening to a lot of Frank Ocean. Yeah. And like Nostalgia Ultra was constantly getting ran. So I was like, like, okay, this works.
Makes sense.
But yeah, that's how the name came about.
That's amazing, man. Yeah. Like I said, I'm a big fan of y'all's. It's been amazing. I'm always tapped in. But to conclude, you know, you've been in Virginia for a really long time at this point. And of course, the show is based in Virginia. It's all about Virginia. What is your sense of pride of, you know, being based in Virginia and also living here?
So the biggest thing is for me, it's like, you know, just knowing that, you know, I grew up in an area where it's just a creative melting pot of everything. You know, I feel as if like I've been blessed enough to grow up in such an environment where I grew up with people who I admire now creatively. You know what I mean? Just seeing all of our journeys come about to what we are now. I get a sense of pride of just like being from here and just be able to do the things I have been able to do here. Because of course, like we all have had the conversations, like people saying, "Oh, you need to go to here, or you got to go to New York, or you got to go to all these cities." Which, obviously, of course, like great. Like eventually, for myself, like I eventually, of course, I've always loved, you know, going to New York. I have family from New York, especially on my mom's side, and it's like, but when it comes to just here alone, like I've just been blessed to like work with the people I've been able to work with, because I wouldn't be where I am today without the people who I've worked with here. You know, in terms of creatively, in terms of like shoots or just anything. And so the biggest thing I would say for me is like, you know, I see it now, like we're building up such a huge community. And I feel like that's going to be the biggest thing that's going to be the turning points for people to feel as if, no, I don't need to leave. You know, I can be able to stay and be able to still create. And the biggest thing is like for any creative, like I want every creative who's in Virginia, everyone to win. I want everyone to succeed. I want everyone to thrive. But the biggest thing I would say is like what you're doing is, whatever you're a DJ, whether you're a photographer, anything, just put 1,000% into what you're doing, because especially if you want to put something out, you gotta feel confident about what you're putting out and know that like you gotta be just putting in 1,000%. Like it's no different than an athlete, like who's trying to make it to college or trying to make D1 or NBA. Like you gotta stay putting up shots in the gym in order to, you know, get to that certain point, or you gotta travel to different places in order to play against certain competition in order to get better. Exactly. So I view it in the same way in terms of creatively. So yeah.
That's amazing, man. Well, thank you. Once again, shout out to D Kane and Jordan Dunman for allowing us to use this space. World of Shapes right here in Neon, Norfolk. And shout out to Bradley for allowing us to use this beautiful vehicle. So yeah, man, another episode of From Within in the books, and appreciate y'all for tapping in with us. So thank you.
Peace.
Yes, you good? Cool.